It was supposed to be just another stormy night in Savannah gutters, overflowing thunder, rolling like distant war drums, and rain slashing the windshield like angry fingers. For Caleb Rowan, a tired repairman with an aching back and too many unpaid bills, it was just about getting home. But then he saw it. A rusted cage tilted in the flood, barely visible in the alley's shadow. Inside, a golden retriever soaked and shivering. Her eyes locked on his through the downpour. He almost kept driving. Almost. Until his granddaughter whispered, "She's trying to stay alive." And in that moment, love didn't ask, it begged. And what Caleb did next would ripple through the entire neighborhood forever. The storm had come in thick and fast over Savannah, Georgia, sweeping across the coastal city with a fury that turned streets into rivers and the sky into a drum of unrelenting thunder. By nightfall, the gutters overflowed like broken dams, and the Spanish moss that hung from the city's ancient oak trees thrashed in the wind like ghostly fingers. Rain battered everything, cars' windows, roofs, with the mindless persistence of something feral. Caleb Rowan hunched over the wheel of his dented blue van, shoulders tight. From a day of crouching beneath air conditioning units, fingers still stiff with the cold and grease of unfinished labor. The wipers squealed across the windshield in protest. As he squinted through the downpour, the haloed glow of streetlights offering little help. He should have been home hours ago, but his granddaughter Lila had come down with another asthma attack that sent them rushing to the children's clinic on Bay Street. She sat now in the back seat, wrapped in her oversized red hoodie, like a small cardinal, and hiding her hazel eyes wide as she stared out the window into the chaos. Caleb, 47, had the look of a man whittled by weather and work-broad shoulders that had carried too much hands, calloused like worn leather, and eyes that rarely smiled. Since his daughter's funeral, his beard had gone more salt than pepper in the past year, and his dark brown hair, once thick, now curled with humidity and the weight of exhaustion. Life had never been gentle with Caleb, and the years since his wife died from cancer, followed by the car crash that took their only daughter, had carved something permanent into the lines around his mouth, a quiet, weary resolve. "Are we almost home?" Lila's voice was small, barely audible over the sound of the storm. "Just a few more minutes, baby girl," Caleb muttered, tapping the steering wheel with the pad of his thumb. His mind was already ahead, imagining the leaking kitchen ceiling, the flickering hallway light. He still hadn't fixed the pile of bills growing like mold on the counter. He wanted the night to end. But the night had other plans. As he turned onto Azalea Avenue, a narrow side street bordered by shuttered laundromats and dented trash bins, a glint of metal caught his eye. Something just off the curb, half submerged in water. It looked like a trash can at first, but as the van's headlights swept over it, the shape clarified into something much worse. A cage. An old rusted dog crate tilted to one side. The door slightly ajar, but padlocked shut. The water was rising around it, like a tide swallowing the sidewalk. Caleb's foot hovered over the gas keep, driving a voice in his head urged, "It's not your problem." But then he heard it. A soft, high-pitched whine, barely audible over the hiss of the rain. Lila leaned forward, her eyes locked on the crate. "Grandpa," she whispered, voice trembling. "There's something in there." Caleb threw the van into park blinkers, flashing into the murk. He opened his door and was instantly soaked rain plastering his flannel shirt to his skin. The wind snatched at him like claws as he stepped onto the street, boots splashing into ankle-deep water. He jogged the short distance to the crate and crouched down inside. Through the bars, a pair of golden eyes met his terrified pleading and impossibly still alive. The dog was a golden retriever, likely 4 or 5 years old, though it was hard to tell through the mud and matted fur. Her coat, once honey-colored, was now a mess of clumped hair and grime. Her body curled tightly as if trying to disappear. She was soaked to the bone, and her sides heaved with shallow, rapid breaths. Her nose bled slightly, likely from trying to shove her face through the cage. One back paw was twisted under her, trembling. There was no food, no blanket, just rust rain and resignation. Caleb tried the padlock. It didn't budge. "Damn it," he hissed. He reached for his toolbox in the van, but as he turned, Lila was suddenly beside him. Her red hoodie already soaked her little hands, clutching the edge of the cage. "We can't leave her," she said simply. "She's trying to stay alive." It wasn't a plea. It was a statement, and something about the way she said it. Steady, quiet, unblinking, cut deeper than any storm Caleb's breath caught. He thought of his wife, her last days spent curled under a patchwork quilt, whispering stories to Lila, even when her voice was nearly gone. He thought of his daughter Danielle, a social worker, who once pulled a kitten from a drain pipe during a flood, and he thought of Lila, this small, pale girl who'd already lost too much. With a grunt, Caleb grabbed the crowbar from the van, returned to the cage, and jammed the edge against the rusted lock. It took 3 strikes. On the 4th, the metal gave way with a shriek. The door sprang open, and the dog didn't move. Caleb reached in, carefully murmuring, "Easy, girl. We're not here to hurt you." He felt the trembling through her ribs as he slipped his arms under her. She was lighter than he expected. Too light, and as he lifted her out, she let out a soft, broken whine that made Lila bury her face into Caleb's jacket. Back in the van, the dog curled into the footwell on a towel Lila had handed him from her backpack. Caleb turned the heater up as high as it would go, trying not to look in the rearview mirror as his granddaughter stroked the dog's soggy fur and whispered, "You're okay now. We got you." They drove home in silence, the city passing like a blur of headlights and wet brick buildings. Savannah had always had an old soul, and tonight it seemed to weep along with them. At one point, Caleb glanced at the dog. Her eyes were closed, but her ears twitched every time Lila spoke. Trust, fragile, tentative, was beginning to root itself in the van's warmth. They reached home, a cramped one-story house, in a weather-beaten neighborhood near the marsh. Caleb carried the dog inside, laying her gently on an old quilt by the heater. Lila knelt beside her, brushing leaves and burrs from her coat. Outside, the storm still raged, but in the flickering kitchen light something had shifted. A door had been opened, not just to the dog, but to something long shut inside Caleb himself. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring: vet bills, neighbors' questions, maybe even trouble. But tonight is Maple. That's what Lila had decided to call her. Let out a sigh and finally closed her eyes. Caleb knew one thing with aching certainty. Some doors were never meant to stay closed. The rain had quieted by morning, but the sky remained hung with a low slate of clouds that felt like they might press the world flat. The city of Savannah still soaked and sagging. From the storm looked bruised in the weak light filtering through the kitchen window. Inside the small house tucked behind a weedy fence and a squeaking mailbox, the air smelled of damp wool and boiled oatmeal. Caleb stood at the stove, his knees cracking as he shifted his weight and stirred the pot with one hand while glancing over his shoulder. On the floor, wrapped in a thick towel and a fleece blanket Lila had fetched from the linen closet, lay the golden retriever they had rescued from the flood. Her fur, now somewhat drier, had taken on a warm, dull gleam, like the last light of autumn, clinging to maple leaves before the wind took them. She was still curled tight, shivering now and then, her breath ragged and her nose dry. She hadn't barked once, nor had she moved more than a few inches since Caleb carried her inside. Lila knelt beside her, brushing the dog's ear with slow, gentle fingers. The girl's hair, dark and tangled from sleep, fell around her face as she whispered, "You look like a maple leaf, soft and golden and kind of tired." The dog blinked once slowly as if in agreement. Lila smiled, turning toward her grandfather. "I think I want to name her Maple." Caleb didn't reply right away. He ladled the oatmeal into 2 chipped bowls, one for himself, one for Lila, then added a third dish of warm water and set it on the floor near the dog Maple. He repeated under his breath. He studied the animal, the way her eyes followed Lila, the way her ribs showed too clearly beneath the fur, the faint but constant tremble in her limbs. He didn't know much about dogs, but he knew enough to see she wasn't well. Fever, maybe. The storm had soaked her to the bone. She needed help, more help than he could give. He sat down with a groan, his back stiff. Years of crawling under houses, climbing onto rooftops, and lugging compressors had aged him faster than the calendar ever could. The bills had stacked up since the business started slowing 2 years ago, and now the idea of a vet visit, let alone medication or tests, was a weight pressing against his chest. As they ate in silence, the front door creaked open and a voice called out, high and cheerful and lightly, "Southern y'all up in there." Before Caleb could rise, Lila had already darted to the door. "Miss Emery," she cried. Emery Klein stepped into the room like sunlight. Tall and lean in her late 30s, she had a way of filling space without overwhelming it. Her voice soft, her smile constant, her eyes always flicking toward the smallest needs in the room. She wore a navy blue raincoat still dotted with drying droplets, and her dark jeans were tucked into muddy boots. Her short chestnut hair was pulled back with a pencil, and she carried a paper bag in one hand and a canvas tote in the other. Emery had been Lila's second-grade teacher for 2 years now. After Danielle passed away, she began checking in on the family every few weeks. At first, it had been for schoolwork, ensuring Lila kept up. But over time, it became more personal. She brought extra book supplies, sometimes groceries. Caleb never quite understood why she kept coming back, but he suspected it had something to do with her own past. Her younger brother had died of a heroin overdose 5 years earlier, and she spoke rarely of it, but her gaze often lingered on father-daughter pairs, with a sadness so deep it became invisible. She knelt beside Lila, ruffled her hair, and turned her eyes toward the dog on the blanket. "Oh, Lord," she breathed. "Where'd you find her?" Caleb explained, the crate, the flood, the broken lock. As he spoke, Emery moved closer to the dog, her tone instinctively soft. "Hey, sweet girl," she murmured. "You've had one hell of a night, haven't you?" She ran a hand just above Maple's head, not touching, until the dog gave a slight lean forward permission. Granted, Emery felt the heat radiating from her skin. "She's burning up," she said, glancing toward Caleb. "She needs a vet." Caleb rubbed a hand over his face, leaving a smudge of oatmeal near his temple. "I know, I just don't know if he didn't finish the sentence." Emery didn't press. Instead, she reached into her tote and pulled out a phone. "Let me call Dr. Houston. He's not far. Mobile vet I volunteer at the shelter sometimes, and he owes me a favor or two." 20 minutes later, a gray Toyota pulled up in front of the house. Out stepped Dr. Howard Houston, a balding man in his early 50s with large glasses and a voice so calm it seemed to slow time. He wore a waterproof windbreaker with his name embroidered on the pocket and a weatherproof case slung over one shoulder. With practiced hands, he examined Maple, checking her temperature, heart rate reflexes. He drew blood from a vein in her foreleg, labeled a sample, then took out a small scanner and passed it over her neck. A soft beep. He frowned. "She's chipped." Lila perked up, like a robot. Dr. Houston smiled. "Not quite. It's a tiny ID under her skin, lets us see where she came from." He glanced at the display. His smile faded. "It's registered to a breeder facility in Screven County. That place got shut down 2 years ago. Animal cruelty charges. The woman who owned it fled the state before they could prosecute. They found a dozen cages, most empty." Caleb's hands tightened on his knees. "So she's from that." "Looks like it. Houston said packing up his things. She's lucky you found her. She's very underweight, dehydrated, and likely fighting a lung infection. You got her just in time." He pulled a bottle of antibiotics from his bag and handed it to Emery. Twice a day, crushed into soft food. Keep her warm. Keep her still. If she worsens, call me again. As the vet drove away, Caleb stood silently at the window. Outside the street was still wet, but the light was shifting clouds, lifting just enough to show the promise of sun. Behind him, Lila tucked the blanket tighter around Maple's curled form. The dog exhaled through her nose, a sound not quite pain, not quite relief. She's safe now, Grandpa Lila said. Caleb didn't speak, but for the first time in a long while, he believed her. The sky over Savannah was a quiet gray soft like ash after the storm's flame. And though the streets were drying, the smell of wet leaves and iron lingered in the air. Caleb had risen early before the sun crested the skyline, the habitual ache in his joints pulling him from restless sleep. He shuffled quietly down the hallway, passing Lila's room, where her soft breathing steadied the world a little, and paused by the folded quilt on the couch. Maple's makeshift bed, the golden retriever, was awake, eyes alert, but body still. She'd made progress. The fever had broken overnight, and her breathing was stronger now. But something in the way she held herself, always curled, always watchful, spoke more of memory than pain. Caleb lowered himself onto the recliner. With a wince, sipped his lukewarm coffee and observed her. She didn't bark, didn't whine, but flinched every time the wind tugged the porch screen or a car door slammed down the street. Later that morning, when Lila opened the kitchen cabinet and let it thud closed, Maple scrambled to her feet in a panic, her paws sliding on the tile as she fled under the dining table. Her body-shook tail tucked so tightly it nearly vanished. Lila crouched beside her, confused and upset. "I didn't mean to scare her," she whispered. Caleb joined them and gently knelt, reaching slowly toward Maple. "It ain't you," he said. "It's something she remembers." Over the next few days, it became obvious any loud noise, sudden movement, or the appearance of an unfamiliar man triggered fear in Maple. Emery noticed it too when she visited again, this time with a small bag of kibble and a bone-shaped toy. "Classic trauma responses," she murmured, her hand resting gently on Maple's back. "Whatever that place did to her. She hasn't forgotten." Caleb had seen animals mistreated and his time-chained dogs with ribs showing cats tossed from cars. But Maple's silence was different. It was as if her bark had been taken, not just lost. He started closing cabinets more softly, wore quieter boots, warned visitors to approach slow and speak softer. Lila, meanwhile, had begun writing about Maple. In her spiral notebook with pink elephants on the cover, she crafted a story called The Dog Who Waited. At school, she told her classmates about Maple, how she'd been rescued during the storm, how her fur was golden like sunflowers, how she slept with her nose tucked into her tail like a fox. Some kids listened politely, some shrugged. But one girl named Isla, who wore her braids too tight and always carried carrot sticks, asked if she could draw a picture. A few days later, during art hour, Isla's picture of Maple won drawing of the week and was pinned up in the hallway near the front entrance. It showed Maple lying in a cage, the rain pouring around her, a beam of light breaking through the storm, and a tiny girl kneeling beside her. "That's me," Lila whispered to her teacher. What neither of them knew was that a woman standing just outside the classroom waiting for her nephew overheard their conversation. Her name was Wanda Kingsley, late 40s, heavy-set warm eyes behind thick red glasses. She worked part-time at the local florist shop and followed several animal rescue groups online. She asked Isla quietly who the dog was, and Isla pointed at Lila. Wanda approached Caleb's house the next evening, cautious but friendly, carrying a pie she'd bought from the gas station bakery and an old photo of her childhood golden retriever. "I don't mean to intrude," she said gently, "but I heard about Maple. I think people would care if they knew. Maybe even help." Caleb wasn't sure what she meant at first. But when she explained about the rescue groups, the photos, and how people online sometimes donated food, medicine, even money for vet care, something flickered in his chest. Hope maybe, or hesitation. With Caleb's permission, Wanda snapped a photo of Maple lying in the living room sunbeam, her fur almost glowing, her eyes half closed. She uploaded it to a Facebook group called Savannah Paws in Need, along with the caption, "Found in a cage during the flood. She's recovering slowly, we call her Maple." By midnight, the post had over 300 shares. The air in Savannah had shifted. It wasn't just the humidity lifting or the break in the rain. It was something else, something stirring. The morning after Wanda's Facebook post went viral, Caleb Rowan stepped outside his modest one-story house on Millridge Lane to fetch the paper and found 2 brown paper bags on his porch. One held canned dog food, the other a folded wool blanket and a handwritten note. For Maple with love, Denise and Mike, just down the block. Caleb blinked in disbelief. He hadn't spoken more than passing greetings to anyone on his street in over a year. Not since the layoffs, not since the bills started stacking like tombstones on his kitchen counter. He picked up the bags and stepped back inside, stunned. Maple, resting in a sun-drenched corner of the living room, perked up as he approached. Her fur, now brushed regularly, thanks to Lila's gentle persistence, shimmered faintly in the light. She was still thin, still haunted, but her eyes no longer held the deadened glaze of the first night. When Caleb laid the blanket beside her, she sniffed it, then slowly, cautiously curled into it. By mid-morning, the doorbell rang twice. The first visitor was a teenage boy named Elijah, tan-skinned, lanky, with acne and shy eyes hidden behind thick frames. He wore a Save the Paws hoodie and carried a cardboard box filled with dry dog treats, chew toys, and flea shampoo. "My sister showed me the post. I raised some donations through my school's animal rights club," he said, barely making eye contact. Caleb, caught off guard, simply stared, then nodded, then reached out to shake the boy's hand. An hour later, a woman named Rosalind Nguyen appeared. Petite, late 30s, her posture upright, like someone who'd worked in ballet or maybe yoga. She was a veterinary technician at a nearby clinic and offered to examine Maple at home if needed. "I've got some spare supplies from the clinic, bandages, supplements, even thermal wraps," she explained, her voice soft but purposeful. "She won't cost you a dime, Mr. Rowan. You already paid with kindness." Caleb stood silent for a moment. Then the words came hoarse and low. "I didn't think anyone still noticed people like us." Rosalind's smile was small and sad. "They do. They just need someone to remind them how," and the people kept coming. Over the next 2 days, strangers knocked with bags of dog food, hand-me-down dog beds, and envelopes with small bills. 5s and 10s folded quietly between index cards. The local pet supply store Mossy Tails sent a delivery van with a large orthopedic dog bed and 2 boxes of premium food labeled "For sensitive recovery, duck and pumpkin." Taped to the side was a note. "She deserves better. Let us know if she needs more." Drew, store manager. Lila, still off school due to storm repairs, kept track of every gift. In a notebook she labeled Maple's Helpers. She wrote down names, sketched hearts next to each donor, and added stars beside the ones who petted Maple gently or spoke in kind tones. "I think Maple's starting to like people again," she whispered to Caleb one evening as the dog rested her head in Lila's lap. That night, as they sat together in the living room, surrounded by boxes of supplies, Caleb's breath caught. He glanced around, the glow of the reading lamp, the laughter of his granddaughter flipping through drawings, the gentle thump of Maple's tail. Each time her name was said, something inside him broke open. Quietly, he lowered his face into his hands and wept. Lila moved to his side, confused grandpa. He wiped his face, the tears soaking into his calloused fingers. "I ain't cried in years, baby girl. Not like this. Not since—" He paused. Since before your grandma passed." Lila hugged him without speaking. "I thought I was invisible." He said, "People drive by this house every day. Ain't nobody stopped in years. Then this dog shows up, and suddenly, it's like the world remembered we're here." Maple shifted and crawled closer, nuzzling his knee. "I didn't just save her," he whispered. "She saved me." The next morning, Caleb received a call from a reporter named Sienna Hayes, mid-40s, with a husky voice and a direct manner. She had read Wanda's post and wanted to do a piece for the Savannah Gazette. "We run stories that remind folks what community really means," she said over the phone. "And yours, well, it's one we all need to hear." Caleb hesitated. "I ain't used to all this attention." Sienna chuckled. "You don't need to be. Just talk like you talk." She arrived later that day, wearing a green raincoat despite the sun, a notepad in one hand, and an old Nikon camera slung over her shoulder. Tall and graceful with short salt and pepper hair and sharp gray eyes. Sienna had the presence of someone who'd seen a lot of broken things and still believed they could be fixed. She sat cross-legged on Caleb's porch, listened to the whole story. Storm Cage, Maple, the strangers now turned friends. She took pictures of Maple curled beside Lila Caleb, fixing a sagging shutter and the little handmade sign Lila had taped to their mailbox. "Thank you for helping Maple." Sienna's article ran in the Sunday edition with the headline, "One Dog, One Storm, One Man. A City Responds." It spread faster than Wanda's post, reaching neighboring towns and triggering more letters, more supplies. Even phone calls from shelters asking if Caleb would consider fostering again someday. He politely declined. One miracle at a time, he told them. That evening, after the article published, Caleb stood out in the yard watching the sunset melt into the oaks. The sky was streaked gold and coral, and the air smelled faintly of honeysuckle, and pine maple lay at his feet, head resting on his boot. The door creaked behind him as Lila stepped out, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. She handed one to Caleb and sat down beside him. "You think she knows," Lila asked, "that people love her now?" Caleb looked down at Maple, who opened her eyes and gave a slow, steady wag of her tail. "She knows," he said, and for the first time in years, Caleb Rowan didn't feel alone. It was late afternoon in Savannah, that strange hour when the sun dipped low enough to stretch the shadows, and the cicadas began their slow, grating hymn. Caleb Rowan had just finished patching the side fence, a job he'd been putting off for months, when a gray pickup truck rolled to a stop outside his house. It was older, the kind that growled instead of purred, with a cracked windshield and a dented bumper held in place by duct tape. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans, eyes narrowing as the driver stepped out. The man was tall and thick-set, maybe mid-50s, with a stomach that pushed against his flannel shirt, and a face that had seen too much sun and too little kindness. His beard was patchy, his boots mud-crusted, and when he spoke, his voice was gravel-soaked in whiskey. "You Caleb Rowan?" the man asked, squinting against the sunlight. "I believe you got something that belongs to me." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He stepped down from the porch and glanced toward the living room window, where Maple sat on her bed, watching the street. The moment she saw the man, her entire posture changed, ears flat, body stiff. A low, deep growl rose from her throat, a sound Caleb hadn't heard from her since the night they found her. Her tail curled protectively toward her belly. The man nodded at the window. "That's her. That's Daisy. Got the papers right here." He pulled a folded envelope from his back pocket and shoved it toward Caleb. "AKC certified. She's mine. Been looking for her for weeks." Caleb didn't take the papers. "She's called Maple now," he said evenly, "and she's not your property." The man's face darkened. "Don't matter what you call her. She's registered under my name. You got a lost dog, you report it. Not paraded around the damn internet like you rescued a saint. I could sue you for theft." At that moment, Emery Rivers pulled up in her battered silver Prius, as she did every few afternoons, to visit Lila and check on Maple's slender early 30s, and with a natural strength behind her quiet voice, Emery had dark brown eyes that missed nothing. She stepped out, sensing tension in the air, like a barometer before a storm. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. The man waved the envelope. "Just here for my dog. These folks are holding her against the law." Emery looked at Caleb. "He says Maple's his." "She doesn't think so," Caleb said softly, nodding toward the window. Maple hadn't moved. She was still growling. The man tried to wave it off. "She's skittish? Always has been. That's just how she gets when she's sick or scared." But Emery wasn't buying it. Dogs remember who hurt them. They don't growl like that, unless they have reason. She pulled out her phone. "What's your name, sir?" He hesitated. Larry Fletch." "I think we'll let the authorities sort this out," Emery said, already typing into her phone. "You could call the damn president." "For all I care," Larry snapped. "I got paperwork." Caleb stepped forward, voice steady. "If she's your dog, how come she was locked in a rusted cage, half flooded? No food, no chip updated, no search notice posted. How come she looks at you like she's seen hell walk back into the room?" Larry's eyes flickered. "That cage ain't mine. I don't know how she ended up there. She got stolen weeks ago, maybe by some punk kids." Emery had found what she was looking for. Her face hardened. "You ran a breeding outfit, didn't you? Carolina Ridge Kennels. Shut down 2 years ago. Multiple citations. Neglect charges, dogs seized by the dozens. Your name's all over the county report." Larry's face drained of color. "That was cleared up. Nothing was proven. Yet here you are," Emery replied. "And that dog, the one you didn't report missing, who has old untreated injuries, who was found abandoned in a storm, is trying to crawl through a wall to get away from you." Just then, a police cruiser turned onto Millridge Lane. Someone had called, maybe a neighbor, maybe Maple's guardian angel. Officer Jenny Alvarez, a stocky woman in her 40s with short buzzed hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen more domestic disputes than she'd ever wanted, stepped out. Her partner, a younger man named Devin, followed. Alvarez looked around, noting the tension. The dog, the envelope, and the man already sweating through his flannel. "What's going on here?" Caleb explained. Emery added the details. Larry raised his voice, waving his paperwork again, trying to claim ownership over an animal whose body shook behind a glass pane at the sound of his boots. Alvarez walked to the window and knelt. Looking through Maple's growl deepened her lips, trembling. The cop didn't flinch. Instead, she turned slowly and walked back to Larry. "We'll need to verify everything you've presented," she said. "You say she's registered to you. We'll check with animal control and cross-reference with the chip data. But in the meantime, you're not taking that dog anywhere." Larry opened his mouth. Devin stepped forward. "Sir, if you keep shouting, we'll ask you to leave the premises. This is a civil matter until it's not." Larry fumed, but said nothing more. He turned, stomped back to his truck, and slammed the door hard enough to make Maple yelp from inside. The officers lingered after he drove away, taking statements, copying documents, and assuring Caleb they'd file an official report. That evening, Lila sat quietly beside Maple, brushing her fur with slow, gentle strokes. "He's not coming back, is he?" she asked. Caleb sat nearby, exhausted but firm. "If he does, we'll be ready, and this time he won't have paperwork to hide behind." Maple rested her chin on Lila's knee and gave a deep, contented sigh. Across town, Emery posted a detailed update about the incident. Within an hour, the post had been shared hundreds of times. People chimed in with old screenshots of Larry's shut-down kennel testimonials from neighbors who remembered hearing cries from his barn at night and reports of similar dogs rescued in poor condition. Justice was slow, but it had begun. The humid air of Savannah clung to the night like a damp blanket. Crickets chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at nocturnal creatures going about their business. Caleb Rowan sat on his porch, the soft glow of a lantern casting flickering shadows. Maple lay at his feet, her golden fur shimmering under the light ears, twitching at every sound. Since the confrontation with Larry Fletch, Caleb had taken precautions. He installed motion sensor lights around the property and set up a security camera overlooking the backyard. Emery had helped him choose the equipment, ensuring it was user-friendly. The community's support had been unwavering, with neighbors frequently checking in and offering assistance. Around midnight, a sudden movement triggered the backyard light. Maple sprang to her feet, a low growl emanating from her throat. Caleb stood up, his heart pounding. He grabbed the flashlight and cautiously approached the back door. Through the window, he saw a shadowy figure attempting to open the gate. "Hey!" Caleb shouted, swinging the door open. The figure froze, then bolted. Maple darted past Caleb, barking furiously. The commotion woke the neighbors, lights flicked on and doors opened. Mr. Jenkins, a retired Marine living next door, emerged with a baseball bat. "What's going on, Caleb?" he called out. "Someone tried to break into the backyard," Caleb replied, trying to calm Maple. Emery, who lived a few houses down, arrived moments later, her phone in hand. "I called the police," she said, her voice steady. Within minutes, officers Alvarez and Devon arrived. They reviewed the security footage, which clearly showed Larry Fletch attempting to breach the gate. The officers nodded grimly. "This violates the restraining order." Alvarez said, "We'll issue a warrant for his arrest." The community rallied around Caleb, and Maple neighbors offered to take shifts watching the property, and Emery organized a neighborhood watch group. The incident, though unsettling, solidified the bond among the residents. Maple, once a symbol of neglect, had become a beacon of unity. Her courage in the face of danger reminded everyone of the strength found in community and the importance of standing together against adversity. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window, illuminating the chipped wooden table where Caleb Rowan sat, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. In his weathered hands, a thin stack of papers trembled ever so slightly, official adoption documents. Across from him sat Lila, her legs swinging back and forth from the chair. Too tall for her feet to touch the floor, her hair still tangled from sleep. She was clutching Maple's leash as if afraid someone might take it from her. Maple herself lay contentedly beneath the table. Her golden fur brushed smooth her nose, resting on her paws. The scar beneath her right eye had started to fade, but the quiet wisdom in her amber eyes had only deepened. Caleb's signature scratched across the final line. His fingers hovered for a beat too long, the pen stalling at the end of his name, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. Then he looked at Lila. "That's it, honey. She's officially ours." Lila's grin stretched wide, and she threw her arms around Maple, who raised her head and let out a soft huff of contentment. It was done. The state of Georgia had granted guardianship of a rescued dog to a man who just weeks ago wasn't sure he could afford dog food, let alone a veterinary bill. But things had changed. Word of Maple's story had traveled far beyond Savannah. A local branch of the Southeast Animal Justice Alliance had reached out. Their regional representative, Tamara Langley, a petite woman with sharp green eyes and tightly curled hair pulled into a bun, had driven from Charleston to deliver the papers in person. She had a calm, no-nonsense presence, but broke into easy laughter when Lila insisted she stay for pancakes. Tamara had seen too many endings that didn't turn out this way. Her eyes had misted when she watched Maple resting her head against Lila's knee. "I've never seen a case go viral and stay so human," Tamar had said softly to Caleb while Maple dozed near the stove. "It's clear she didn't just find safety. She found a family." Tamara handed Caleb a small envelope before leaving. Inside was a gift card for veterinary services, courtesy of a donor who had read Maple's story online. "Everything for her basic care for the next year," the note said in neat handwriting. Caleb folded the envelope and tucked it into the coffee tin labeled Rainy Day on top of the fridge. That evening, Caleb invited Emery for dinner. She arrived in her usual understated way. No makeup, her chestnut hair tied back in a loose braid, a woven tote slung over one shoulder. Emery Stone was 32, a fifth-grade teacher with a quiet resilience. She was lean, slightly hunched from years of stooping over children's desks, and her voice carried the kind of gentle authority that made even the most unruly student stop mid-chaos. Her life hadn't been easy. She had once confided in Caleb that she grew up in the foster system and knew what it meant to long for permanence. Maybe that's why she had bonded so easily with Lila. Dinner was simple: grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, and honey-glazed carrots. Lila insisted on folding the napkins like they do on TV, and Maple was given a special treat: a bone-shaped biscuit from the bag donated by the pet supply shop. The four of them, man, girl, dog, and guest, sat together under the soft hum of the ceiling fan, eating and talking about nothing and everything. "You've done something extraordinary," Caleb Emery said as they washed dishes together. "Not just for Maple, but for all of us. This whole street feels different now." Caleb chuckled, passing her a towel. "I'm not the hero folks make me out to be. You showed up when it mattered. That's more than most." Later that week, Caleb started noticing little things. Neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years would wave as he walked Maple down the sidewalk. The owner of the corner bakery handed him a cinnamon roll and refused payment. A young couple dropped off a painting, Maple sitting regal beneath a tree, Lila's hand in her fur. The frame was crooked, but the love behind it was perfectly centered. Even Mr. Halverson, the grumpy retiree who never waved to anyone, left a box of chew toys at Caleb's doorstep, with a note that read simply, "For the hero and his dog." But Caleb didn't feel like a hero. He still walked with a limp from an old roofing accident. The bills hadn't magically disappeared. Some nights were still heavy with memories of his wife, of all the years when the house had been too quiet. But now there were new sounds: Lila's giggles, Maple's gentle bark, the scrape of claws on the hardwood floor. There was warmth. One night he stood by the window and watched Lila and Maple curled up together on the living room rug, the television flickering blue light across their faces. The dog had her head nestled into Lila's chest, and the girl's hand rose and fell with every breath Maple took. Caleb whispered more to himself than anyone else. "You're the miracle girl." Maple stirred her ears, twitching as if she'd heard him. Maybe she had. Maybe in the way only animals understood. She knew how much she'd changed their world. The sun rose warm and golden over Savannah, casting soft light across Rosewood Park. A gentle spring breeze rustled the newly budding trees, and the scent of fresh grass and blooming azaleas filled the air. The storm season had passed, and with it so had many of the shadows that had lingered in Caleb Rowan's heart. Today was something different, a day carved from joy rather than survival. Today was Maple's day. A long banner fluttered across the entrance to the park, hand-painted in bright colors by the local school children. "Thank you, Maple." Beneath it, folding tables lined with dog treats, sandwiches, and lemonade welcomed neighbors and strangers alike. The community had come together fueled by a story that had touched their hearts. The story of a golden retriever rescued from a storm, and the man and girl who opened their door to her. Maple trotted slowly along the gravel path, her gait still stiff from old injuries, but her tail never stopped wagging. Her coat, once matted and dull, now shimmered pale gold in the sun. She wore a red bandana around her neck, and her leash was held gently by Lila, who walked proudly at her side. Lila's hair was braided with yellow ribbons, her small hand stroking Maple's shoulder every few steps, as if to reassure the dog, and perhaps herself, that all of this was real. Caleb followed a few paces behind his usual slouched frame, standing straighter. Today, he wore his best denim jacket patched at the elbow and a clean cap. His weathered face bore signs of disbelief and quiet pride as he watched his granddaughter lead their dog through a crowd of cheering people. "Is that the man?" a voice whispered nearby. "The one who saved her." A woman with 2 toddlers in tow turned to smile at Caleb. "God bless you, sir. What you did for that dog?" It gave all of us something to believe in. Caleb nodded politely, unsure how to respond. Compliments still sat awkwardly on his shoulders. He'd never thought of himself as anyone special. Just a man who made a choice in the rain. At the gazebo in the center of the park, Emery waited with a clipboard and a small speaker system. She wore a sundress for the occasion, her usually practical hair tied back with a scarf. When she saw Maple and Lila approach, her face lit up. "There's our guest of honor," she said into the microphone, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, pups and pets, we're gathered here today to celebrate resilience, kindness, and second chances. But most of all, we're here to celebrate Maple." The applause was instant and loud. Lila helped Maple onto the small platform, careful not to let her strain her back leg. The dog sat dutifully beside her as Emery stepped aside. Caleb tried to stay near the back, but Lila spotted him and waved him forward. He sighed and made his way toward the front as Lila adjusted the microphone for her height. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice shaking just a little. Most of you know me, but if you don't, I'm Lila Rowan, and this is Maple. We found her in a cage during the storm. She was cold and hurt and scared, but she's not just a dog we rescued. She rescued us too." The crowd quieted, hanging on her words. "My mom passed away 2 years ago," Lila continued. "It was just me and Grandpa for a long time. He works hard, but he was really sad. Even when he smiled. When we brought Maple home, it felt like someone turned a light on again. She helped us heal. So thank you for loving her too." There were sniffles from the crowd. Even Emery dabbed at her eyes. "And Grandpa," Lila said, looking toward Caleb, "you said Maple was a miracle. But I think maybe you were the miracle first." Caleb swallowed hard, every part of him aching in that good breaking way that only comes from love. He didn't know what to say, but the moment didn't need words. He stepped forward, placed a hand on Maple's back, and gave his granddaughter's shoulder a squeeze. Emery returned to the mic. "Today we want to honor Maple by officially naming April 17th as Maple's Day in our community. Let it remind us that acts of kindness, even in the darkest storm, ripple outward." After the speeches, the day unfolded with laughter and music. Children lined up to pet. Maple volunteers passed out flyers about adopting rescued animals. A pet bakery handed out tiny pup cakes. Emery's students sold handmade bookmarks with Maple's paw print on them. Funds raised went to a local shelter. At one point, a small boy with glasses knelt beside Maple and whispered, "You're my hero." Maple nudged his hand, gently tail swishing. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the grass, Caleb sat on a bench near the edge of the park. Maple lay at his feet, her body relaxed, her eyes watching Lila, who danced with a few neighborhood kids near the food stand. He looked down at the dog whose presence had changed everything. Once he had believed that family meant flesh and blood, but now watching strangers become friends and friends become family, he knew better. Family was anyone who showed up when the storm rolled in and stayed after it passed. Maple gave a soft bark as if in agreement and rested her head on his boot. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come in the quiet eyes of a broken dog, in the soft touch of a child, or in the outstretched hand of a neighbor. Maple didn't just survive the storm. She transformed it. Through her, an old man rediscovered hope. A little girl found joy again, and a whole neighborhood remembered the power of compassion. And maybe that was no accident. Because when we open our doors to love, especially when it's wounded and afraid, something divine happens. In the middle of our messy, ordinary lives, God still sends little miracles. Not to change the world at once, but to remind us that it's worth saving one act of kindness at a time. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us how Maple's journey reminded you of your own. And if you believe in second chances and quiet miracles, type Amen below. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of redemption, love, and courage. May God bless you and all the creatures He sends to walk beside us.